They say raw truth cuts deeper than any carefully concealed secret, and on that overcast afternoon nothing could have prepared the family for what would emerge from the silence of decades past. In a modest, weathered home perched on the edge of a quiet suburban street, the subtle murmur of old memories intermingled with the damp autumn air. Michael, the eldest of the siblings and the one who had long shouldered the arduous responsibility of looking after their aging grandfather, had taken an impulsive leap into hope. He had brought home a scruffy, gentle-eyed mutt with a name that seemed to hold promise, Scout. Michael believed the little dog's unconditional affection might somehow stitch together the gaping wound in the old man's heart left by unspeakable loss. Grandfather Henry had been an imposing figure in his youth, dignified, with a face etched by time and secrets, and an unwavering moral compass that everyone in the family respected. But time and endless sorrow had weathered even his formidable stoicism. His sorrow was palpable, an undercurrent to every word he spoke, every silent moment at the dinner table. Michael had seen it in the slight tremor of his hand when he poured tea each morning and in the distant look in his eyes when he remembered a name lost to memory. Adopting Scout seemed like a hopeful remedy, a fragile attempt to recapture the vibrant days before grief shadowed every corner of their lives. On the very day Scout arrived, the dog's behavior unsettled everyone immediately. The little creature would nuzzle against each family member, wagging his tail like a metronome set on cheer. Yet when Grandfather Henry's gaze fell on an old, framed photograph resting on the dusty mantel of the living room, one that no one ever dared to mention, the dog's whole body shuddered in a peculiar, heart-wrenching whine. It was as if Scout could sense a tremor of falsity in the room, a hidden truth that had twisted the familiar into something unknowable. His whine persisted every time his eyes met the image, a plaintive sound that echoed against the silence of the past. In the weeks that followed, the household's delicate balance began to unfurl. The photograph in question was an enigmatic portrait capturing a moment from a long-forgotten summer. It showed a young Henry, full of life and radiant optimism, standing beside a woman whose smile, though enchanting, belied an aura of quiet melancholy. The woman's eyes held a secret, as if they promised to reveal a hidden chapter of the past if only someone would look deep enough. For reasons that no one could articulate, the image had been banished to the background of the family's collective narrative, until now. Each evening, as the family gathered around the old oak dining table set against the glow of amber lamplight, the photograph loomed like an unspoken question. Conversations that began with everyday topics slowly tapered off whenever a stray glance touched the image. Michael, feeling a mixture of guilt and longing, couldn't help but notice his grandfather's furtive glances at it. It was as if Henry was both repelled and drawn toward the memory, trapped in a silent wrestling match with his own past. During one particularly lingering twilight, Michael found himself alone with Henry in the cramped hallway leading up to the study. The hallway was a narrow corridor lined with family mementos and faded wallpaper, a testament to years passed by, each mark and scratch whispering memories. Michael's heart pounded as he broached the subject that had been haunting him for weeks. "Grandpa, what's the story behind that photograph?" he asked softly, his voice almost swallowed by the hushed ambience of the old house. Henry hesitated, his gaze fixed ahead as if he could see beyond the present, into the recesses of a memory too painful to revisit openly. For a long, breathless moment, silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the subtle creaks of the settling house. Then, in a voice heavy with reluctance and shadowed regret, Henry murmured, "That picture, it belongs to another time, a time when choices were made that changed everything." His eyes, refracted in the low light, betrayed a storm of emotions that belied his composed exterior. Michael felt both drawn and repelled by the depths hidden in his grandfather's soft-spoken admission. Outside, autumn's chill deepened, and the falling leaves became scattered fragments of a once whole picture. Michael couldn't shake the idea that the dog's mournful reaction was more than a mere quirk of canine temperament. Instead, it suggested that even creatures without language could decode the emotional residue left by a concealed betrayal. Scout's unyielding whine whenever the photograph entered his peripheral vision seemed like the anguished whisper of an unspoken truth, a truth that had festered beneath layers of silence for decades. In a bid to understand the mystery that bound his family's past, Michael began to piece together fragments of hushed conversations and half-forgotten recollections. his quest led him to the dusty confines of his old school library, a quiet refuge where he combed through brittle newspapers and yellowed letters, searching for clues about the enigmatic woman in the photograph. The library, with its towering shelves and the comforting rustle of pages turned by unseen hands, served as a silent accomplice in his investigation. Michael's fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded a faded article describing a scandal that had rocked the community many years ago, one involving an unexpected liaison and a betrayal that fractured old alliances. Though names had been changed and details glossed over by time, the tone of the article resonated with the quiet sorrow Henry had etched into every line of his recollections. Every new piece of information Michael discovered deepened the mystery. The woman in the photograph was identified only by her first name, Elise. As Michael searched further, he learned that Elise had once been the darling of the town, celebrated not just for her beauty but also for her fiery spirit and a passionate nature that defied convention. Yet as whispers of scandal swirled, so did the dark murmurings of betrayal. Elise was rumored to have been involved in a liaison that shattered a family alliance and left irrevocable scars on those who believed in loyalty above all else. Michael's pulse quickened at the thought. Could it be that his beloved grandfather had somehow been tangled in this storm of passion and deceit? At home, the tension became almost tangible. In the gentle interplay of light and shadow across the living room floor, the family shared moments of mundane comfort, like the aroma of freshly baked bread or the soft hum of the radio, clashed with the growing undercurrent of confusion and disquiet. Even Scout, usually a beacon of playful energy, seemed subdued, his eyes filled with a knowing sadness whenever he circled near the photograph. His soulful whine grew more insistent, as though every note was a plea for acknowledgement of the suppressed truth. One rain-soaked evening, as droplets tapped a relentless rhythm against the window panes, Michael found solace in a quiet conversation with his sister, Clara. In the comfort of their shared history and in the familiarity of the creaking back porch where they used to linger after dinner, Clara confessed her own recollections of the past. "I remember the day I first saw that picture," she said, her voice low and measured against the backdrop of pattering rain. "Grandpa's face changed, the light left his eyes for just a moment, and I saw something like despair. I always thought it was just grief, but maybe there's more to it." Her words were steeped in quiet anguish, resonating with Michael's own inner turmoil. As the conversation drifted into the uncertain spaces between memory and speculation, the rain turned into a torrential downpour that blurred the boundary between past and present. The family's home, with its creaking floorboards and time-worn pictures, became a stage for the unfolding drama of suppressed emotions and elusive truths. Each whispered recollection and furtive glance seemed to build toward an inevitable climax, a reckoning of the secret history that had shaped every member of the family in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. Days turned into weeks, and Michael's investigation into Elise and the old scandal began to yield more intricate details. In an old attic of the house, a space that had long been shrouded in neglect and mystery, he discovered a collection of letters hidden in a battered trunk. The letters, penned in delicate, hurried script, suggested that Elise had been more than just a fleeting presence in Henry's life. They painted a picture of a passionate and troubled relationship, filled with desperate promises and whispered regrets. Michael's hand shook as he read through the tender, sorrow-laden words that, if fully revealed, might shatter the carefully maintained facade of the family's collective memory. Throughout these days, Scout's behavior remained unchanged, steadfast in his devotion to his human companions but mysteriously vocal whenever the controversial photograph was in view. The dog would pace restlessly around the mantel, his ears pricked and tail low, emitting a soft, haunting whine that filled the silent intervals of the day. It was as if Scout, without understanding the intricacies of human language or memory, could perceive the subtle vibrations of an emotional undercurrent that lay hidden beneath years of silence. His reaction was a raw and unfiltered response to the buried truth that haunted the photograph. In the midst of Michael's quest, the family found brief respites in ordinary routines. Sunday mornings still began with the comforting ritual of shared pancakes and gentle laughter over small, inconsequential stories from the previous week. These moments, though they held the veneer of normalcy, were now tinged with a palpable anticipation, as if everyone sensed that the fragile calm was merely the lull before an inevitable storm of revelations. The ordinary setting of the kitchen, with its worn wooden table and familiar hum of the refrigerator, became an unlikely arena where the extraordinary weight of secrecy pressed down on every shared smile and hesitant glance. As Michael pieced together more fragments of the past, the narrative of his grandfather's life grew ever more complex. His inquiries led him through dusty archives in the local town hall, quiet interviews with old acquaintances, and even late-night telephone calls with relatives who had once been privy to the scandal. Each new connection and every faded memory wove together a tapestry of intricate relationships and half-truths. The once clear picture of Henry as the steadfast patriarch began to fracture, revealing layers of vulnerability and regret that had been buried beneath the years. Even as the external world carried on with its measured pace, neighbors exchanging pleasantries over freshly trimmed hedges, and children riding bicycles down sunlit streets, the inner workings of the family were slowly unraveling. Michael's discoveries, while painstakingly documented in a worn journal filled with scrawled notes and hastily drawn timelines, carried an undercurrent of quiet devastation. Every detail unraveled a mystery, a whispered promise here, a long-forgotten meeting there. It was as if the family's hidden past was eagerly clawing its way to the surface, desperate to be recognized and acknowledged despite decades of repression. Late one night, in the solemn hush of a moonlit room, Michael revisited the study where Henry had once meticulously maintained his books and records. The study was a sanctum of memories, its walls lined with relics of a bygone era, and every object there seemed to hold a story. With the weight of his newfound knowledge pressing down upon him, Michael laid out all the pieces on a battered desk, a mosaic of letters, faded photographs, and scribbled notes. He searched for any indication that could explain why Scout reacted so intensely to that single photograph. The dog's behavior was inexplicable in all rational terms, yet it was as if his very presence had become the guardian of a secret too bitter to be spoken aloud. The scratch of pen on paper, the muted rustle of turning pages, and the occasional creak of old wood became the only sounds in that almost sacred space. It was in this quiet confrontation with the past that Michael began to see the contours of an intricate betrayal, one that had pitted loyalty against passion and duty against desire. The photograph, the letters, and even the spectral whine of Scout were all part of a larger narrative, a narrative where once cherished bonds had been shattered by the weight of an unspoken history. In that dim light, as shadows danced along the walls, Michael could almost hear the ghosts of lost promises, murmuring their regrets to the unyielding quiet of night. There was something achingly human in the way each detail unfurled before him, a raw and unfiltered glimpse into lives that had been defined by mistakes and moments of reckless abandon. Michael realized that the family secret was not merely an old scandal to be hushed up, but a living, breathing testament to the frailty of human relationships. It was a reminder that beneath the veneer of normality lay a realm of emotions and decisions that could irrevocably alter the course of lives. And it was through the silent, discerning eyes of Scout, the gentle guardian of truth, that the first faint outlines of this hidden past began to emerge. The next morning, as the first timid rays of daylight seeped through the curtains, Michael carried his burden of revelation into the kitchen. There, over cups of steaming coffee and the soft hum of a city waking up, he felt the weight of responsibility. In his heart, he knew that unraveling this secret would demand more than just a pursuit of facts. It would require confronting the vulnerabilities of a man he revered. And as he watched his grandfather stir his tea with careful deliberation, Michael could not shake the feeling that something monumental was poised to reshape their lives forever. In the quiet everyday moments that followed, amid the hum of routine and the comforting clatter of dishes, the family's unspoken understanding of loss and longing seemed to pulse like a hidden heartbeat. Even as the gentle cadence of morning rituals carried on, an undercurrent of tension threaded through every smile and shared glance. It was in these precise, fragile instants that the truth, long muted but ever present, hinted at its inevitable return, ready to burst forth and change everything the family thought they knew about love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Each step Michael took towards uncovering the layers of his grandfather's secret past was imbued with both trepidation and an inexplicable sense of liberation. And though the days ahead promised more unanswered questions and the stirring of old wounds, in that moment, as the house slowly awakened to a brand new day, there flickered a fragile hope, a hope that through confronting the buried truths, the family might finally learn to heal. The quiet desperation in the house grew heavier with each passing day, every shadow in the corner of a room whispering echoes of secrets long confined. Michael found himself drawn into a labyrinth of half-forgotten memories and hushed confessions as he sought to unmask the truth behind Elise and the sorrow etched into his grandfather's eyes. Late one afternoon, as muted sunlight painted patterns on the creaking wooden floor of the living room, Michael sat close to his grandfather in a rare moment of genuine intimacy. The old man's frail hands trembled as he toyed with a worn cufflink, and his gaze wandered to distant, uncharted territories that belonged to a time now swallowed by silence. Michael gently broached the subject again, his voice a low murmur blending with the rustle of wind outside. "Grandpa, what happened back then? What did Elise mean to you?" Henry's eyes, once so resolute, now shimmered with the unshed tears of years filled with regret. He hesitated, each heartbeat punctuating the unspeakable weight of his past, before finally letting the words slip out. "She was my solace and my undoing, Michael. In her, I found a passion that defied the cold expectations of our world, but it cost me everything I held dear." His confession, raw and unvarnished, vibrated through the still air, stirring a reverberating mixture of empathy and dread in Michael's chest. The words, fragile as they were, began to carve away at the carefully constructed walls of silence that had guarded the family secret. That night, the house seemed to exhale its hidden sorrows as Michael's mind raced with images of a younger Henry, vibrant, defiant, and hopelessly entangled in a love that was as fierce as it was forbidden. Sleep eluded him as memories and new revelations tangled together in his thoughts. In a restless haze, he found himself reaching for the leather-bound journal he had discovered days before, tucked away among the yellowed letters in the attic. Its pages held feverish scrawls and half-finished sentences that revealed the turbulent emotions of a man who had once dared to challenge the confines of duty and decorum. On a drizzly morning that blurred the edges of reality and memory, Michael ventured into the heart of town. The local records office, a somber brick building that had withstood decades of whispered rumors and muted judgments, seemed an unlikely repository for the remnants of a scandal so deeply buried. As he sifted through fragile documents and archived clippings, Michael encountered a weathered newspaper article that recounted the long-ago controversy, a tale of a clandestine romance, of promises shattered like delicate glass, and a betrayal that had thrust his grandfather into a life of quiet self-imposed exile. The article, though sparing in its details, hinted at an affair that had scandalized the town and irrevocably altered the family's course. Michael's pulse raced as he absorbed the implications. Elise was not merely a fleeting infatuation, but the center of a storm that had left indelible scars on everyone involved. In the days that followed, the once familiar environments of Michael's life began to morph into settings drenched with symbolic meaning. At the local cafe, a modest, time-worn establishment where regulars sipped steaming cups of coffee and nibbled on flaky pastries, he encountered an elderly woman who had known Henry in his youth. Over the clink of porcelain and murmured greetings, the woman's soft-spoken recollections hinted at a tenderness in Henry that few had witnessed. "He cared for her like a man who had discovered a rare melody," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of nostalgia and sorrow. But that melody turned into a dirge when the truth came out. Her words, as gentle as the swirl of cream in her cup, added yet another layer to the intricate portrait of a man torn between love and obligation. Meanwhile, home became an arena for silent battles of memory and perception. Clara had taken to spending long hours on the back porch, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for some intangible answer in the meeting of earth and sky. One humid evening, as cicadas drummed a relentless cadence and the air smelt of impending rain, she finally confided in Michael once more. "I caught a glimpse of something, a document tucked behind a loose brick in the study," she admitted in a low voice that trembled with both fear and resolve. "It wasn't much, just a scrap of paper, but it bore the initials that only Henry ever used." Her revelation unfurled a flutter of anticipation and trepidation in Michael's heart. The possibility that the house itself might guard further evidence of his grandfather's past was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. Curiosity, tinged with the dread of what might be uncovered, wove its tendrils around Michael's every thought. That very night, under the cover of darkness and the persistent hush of a summer storm outside, he retraced Clara's steps, methodically searching the dim study that held relics of a bygone era. Flickering lamplight cast long shadows on the antique furniture and musty volumes that lined the shelves. His fingers brushed across the peeling wallpaper until they discovered a brittle, folded piece of paper wedged behind a heavy, imposing ledger. With bated breath, Michael unfolded it to reveal faded handwriting and cryptic notations. The content spoke of a secret meeting, a rendezvous between his grandfather and a mysterious figure cloaked in both allure and intrigue. In that cramped moment, the ticking of a nearby clock seemed to merge with the pulse of an ancient regret, each tick echoing a plea for closure. The discovery intensified the emotional gravity that had long simmered beneath the surface of everyday life. Over subsequent days, Michael began meticulously connecting the scattered fragments of evidence with the help of Clara, whose own memories emerged in quiet bursts. They spent long hours in hushed conversation in the silent intimacy of the attic, piecing together letter after letter, each one a piece of a jigsaw puzzle that revealed the complexity of Henry's secret world. In one particularly poignant note, penned in a hurried scrawl and stained with the residue of tears, Elise's name was mentioned alongside cryptic references to long-forgotten family gatherings and whispered promises. The implication struck Michael like a forceful tide, a relentless intrusion that threatened to engulf not just his grandfather's dignity, but the very identity of their family. Outside the rigid confines of documented proof, a more intangible struggle brewed. Every so often, Scout, the scruffy little dog whose empathetic soul now seemed intertwined with the family's hidden narrative, would pace back and forth by the mantel as if guarding an invisible gateway to the past. His eyes, deep and unblinking, followed Michael wherever he went, as if silently urging him to look beyond the veneer of everyday life into the labyrinth of raw, unedited truth. The dog's disquiet, its low mournful whines whenever a particular photograph came into view, became both a harbinger and a symbol, a call to acknowledge that buried secrets cannot remain in perpetual darkness. In a world where the boundaries between ordinary routine and explosive emotional revelation blurred, the small town itself began to take on the character of a living memory. Every narrow street and aging storefront seemed to harbor secrets of its own, whispering tales of a past that refused to be forgotten. At the town hall, where community meetings were held amid the clamor of civic routine, Michael overheard murmurs about old alliances and veiled animosities connected to the scandal. Even those who had long retreated into the safe cocoon of their personal lives could not entirely escape the ripple effects of an affair that had once threatened to rip apart the fabric of their close-knit community. As the relentless summer yielded to the cooler embrace of early autumn, Michael's inner resolve hardened. He began to envision his journey not merely as a quest for personal truth, but as an imperative act of healing for the entire family, a chance to mend the ruptured seams of a legacy once defined by pride and tradition, now tarnished by regret. Late-night rendezvous with old friends of Henry, careful conversations with archival custodians, and even an unexpected visit to a long-abandoned house on the outskirts of town wove together a tapestry of revelations. Each new discovery was laden with the bittersweet aroma of nostalgia and the painful sting of what could have been. In one such forsaken place, a crumbling colonial house encircled by wild ivy and the whispers of decay, Michael encountered a former friend of his grandfather. The man, who had lived through the scandal with equal part sorrow and resignation, spoke in low, deliberate tones about the irresistible allure of forbidden love. Henry was never truly free from the chains of his own expectations, he confided, eyes reflecting a lifetime of misgivings. When Elise entered his life, it was as if a dormant part of him had awakened, a part that defied the strict moral codes he had always upheld. But with that awakening came a price too steep to bear. Every word from that encounter resonated deeply within Michael, sparking a maelstrom of questions that threatened to overwhelm his cautious pursuit. In the long hours that followed, as twilight deepened into night and the boundaries between what was remembered and what was imagined blurred into indistinction, the enduring tension between truth and silence grew nearly unbearable. What began as a personal investigation was now on the cusp of emerging as a reckoning that would force the entire family to confront decades of buried pain. Amid this intricate dance of recollection and revelation, Michael realized that the quest for truth was rarely a linear journey. With every carefully examined document, every whispered story exchanged in the quiet of midnight, and every inexplicable, sorrowful whine from Scout echoing in the background, he uncovered more than just a faded romance or a transient scandal. He discovered the enduring vulnerability of human hearts, how love, when intertwined with the inexorable force of duty and tradition, could generate wounds so deep that even time struggled to heal them completely. In the soft luminescence of a street lamp outside his window, Michael's silhouette merged with the darkness as he pored over the newly found scraps of correspondence. The ink, though faded, still spoke with unyielding clarity of late-night rendezvous, of clandestine promises made under a sky heavy with regret, and of a secret that had irrevocably reshaped the course of his family's destiny. Every sentence held an eerie beauty, a bittersweet symphony of words that seemed to sing of both unparalleled passion and irrevocable loss. The more he read, the more he realized that this hidden chapter of his grandfather's life was not a mere footnote in an otherwise unblemished history, but a powerful, defining force that had reverberated through generations. In those hushed, solitary hours, the charged energy of the past surged into the present. Michael's heart pounded with the realization that to finally understand the true nature of his grandfather's sorrow, he must confront the very essence of the betrayal, the passionate indiscretion that had seeded so much lingering pain. And though the road ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, its path marked by the debris of splintered loyalties and emotional ruin, he sensed that only by venturing into the depths of that long-hidden love could reconciliation ever be within reach. The days melted into each other as the season turned, and the once familiar cadence of life became interwoven with the slow, measured unraveling of decades-old regret. In the quiet moments shared over dinner, or in the solemn silence of a well-worn study late at night, the echoes of the past refused to be silenced. And while the ordinary world outside carried on with its measured routine, inside the modest confines of their home, an undercurrent of inevitable catharsis swirled, a tidal pull that threatened to upend everything in its wake. In that relentless pursuit of truth, Michael sensed a growing metamorphosis within himself. The quest had begun as a private rumination, a desperate need to understand his grandfather's inscrutable sorrow. But as evidence steadily accumulated and the contours of a forgotten past sharpened into painful clarity, it evolved into something more profound, a movement toward healing, accountability, and ultimately, forgiveness. Even as Scout's plaintive whines punctuated moments of introspection with hints of empathetic protest, Michael steeled himself for the confrontation that loomed on the horizon. The secrets, once carefully entombed beneath the weight of silence, were now clawing their way into daylight, demanding recognition, however devastating the truth might be. The autumn wind picked up that evening, howling through the trees like a wounded animal. The air had a bite to it, that sharp, electric feeling you get just before something breaks, something invisible, something important. Inside the house, everything felt still, like the world was holding its breath. Michael stood in front of the mantel again, looking at that same damned photo. The one Scout always whined at. The same grainy black and white picture of his grandfather in uniform, standing straight and proud beside a woman Michael had always assumed was his grandmother. But it wasn't. Not according to the letters. Not according to what the dog kept trying to tell them. And that was what gnawed at him the most, not just the secrets buried in paper and memory, but the ones this dog, this strange, intuitive little creature, seemed to feel. Scout wasn't just reacting to images. He was reacting to truths. Emotional truths. The kind that lingered in the bones of a house, that seeped into its floorboards like water damage. Clara came into the room quietly, her voice barely audible over the creaking of the floor. "I think I know who she is," she said, eyes fixed on the woman in the photo. Or was. Her expression wasn't shocked, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying a suspicion too long. Michael turned to her slowly, every nerve on edge. "Tell me." Clara hesitated, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear like she was trying to buy herself a second or two. "When I was little, Grandpa used to get these letters in the mail, always with no return address. Thick, creamy envelopes. Beautiful handwriting. I remember once, I had to be 6 or 7, I tried to open one, thinking it was a birthday card. He snatched it from me so fast his coffee spilled. He never yelled, but that day he looked at me like I'd walked in on something I wasn't supposed to see. Like I'd opened a door to a room that wasn't mine." Michael nodded slowly, something in his chest tightening. "Did you ever see what was inside?" "No," her voice broke a little. "But he kept them. Somewhere." "I know he did." That night, they tore the study apart. Not violently. There wasn't any dramatic flinging of drawers or smashing of picture frames. It was quieter than that. Reverent. Like peeling back layers of skin. They checked behind bookshelves, inside hollowed-out encyclopedias in the false bottom of an old cigar box. It was Clara who finally found it, wedged between the back panel of a desk drawer and the wood behind it. A bundle of envelopes tied with twine. Yellowed, soft-edged. Still sealed. They sat together on the floor like kids hiding from thunder, slowly opening each one, reading by lamplight. The handwriting was beautiful, elegant, cursive, careful, and unmistakably Elise. What spilled out across those pages wasn't scandal. It was longing. Pages and pages of it. Of a love that had been forced into silence. A relationship sustained in absence, sustained in shadows. Of promises that couldn't be kept. Of a child never spoken of. Michael stopped cold at that line. He has your eyes. He read it again. And again. His vision blurred. His hands trembled. Clara, he whispered, voice cracking. There was a child. She didn't say anything, but he could feel her breath catch beside him. They read more. Elise had moved away after everything collapsed. Changed her name. Married someone else. But not before she had a son. Henry's son. Michael and Clara's uncle, though they'd never known it. And here was the photo again, but now every part of it looked different. It wasn't Henry and his wife. It was Henry and Elise. Taken just before everything had gone to hell. Scout whined, low and pitiful, nudging the edge of the photo with his nose. His whole body tense. Almost protective. Clara looked down at him, a strange calm in her face now. He knew. He's been trying to tell us. The rest of the letters painted a portrait of Elise's life, a quiet one, a good one, but threaded with pain. A woman who never fully moved on, who never quite stopped waiting for Henry to come find her again. But he never did. And now he never would. They sat with the letters for a long time. Neither of them could speak. What was there to say? It wasn't until the next morning that they approached Henry again. He was sitting in the sunroom, eyes closed, breathing slow and shallow. The dog curled at his feet, unmoving. Michael knelt beside him. "Grandpa, we found the letters." For a long time, he didn't open his eyes. Then, finally, he nodded. "I knew you would." The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. Clara moved closer, her voice soft. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Henry's eyes opened slowly. "Because I couldn't. Because I wasn't allowed to love her. Because I was weak." There was no anger in his voice. Just fact. Cold and unchangeable. Michael swallowed hard. "You had a son." Henry didn't flinch. "I know." The silence that followed was suffocating. He reached out once, he added, almost a whisper. "Years ago. I never wrote back." "Why not?" Michael's voice was sharp now, cutting. Henry's eyes drifted to the photograph. "Because I didn't deserve him." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Not dramatic, not loud, just true. Devastatingly true. Michael didn't speak. Neither did Clara. They just sat with him. Let the weight of it settle. Later that day, they started searching for the boy, now a man. No last name. No city. Just the clues in Elise's letters. A few towns mentioned, a school. A job at a hardware store. It wasn't much, but it was something. It took days. Dozens of calls. A couple of dead ends. But then a woman in Vermont answered the phone and said, "Yes. I think that's my dad." Michael's heart stuttered in his chest. They didn't tell Henry right away. What could they even say? That the son he abandoned might be willing to meet him? Instead, they sat with it. Let it simmer. Let the idea breathe. And then one morning, Clara knocked on Michael's door. He said yes. He wants to come. Michael's stomach flipped. Henry didn't ask a lot of questions when they told him. Just nodded. "I never thought I'd meet him," he said. "I don't expect anything. But thank you." The meeting was set for a Sunday. Scout paced all morning. The hours leading up to it were slow and thick, like walking through syrup. Henry dressed carefully, even tried to comb what little hair he had left. Clara straightened his collar. Michael made coffee he knew no one would drink. When the car finally pulled into the driveway, the world stopped. The man who stepped out was tall. Mid-50s. Same eyes as Henry. Same jawline. He walked slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching the edge of a dream. Henry met him at the door. Neither of them spoke at first. Then, finally, Henry said, "You look like her." The man, his name was Paul, nodded. "So do you." Scout let out a soft, almost imperceptible whine. Then lay down at their feet. And somehow, that said everything. Paul stayed for dinner that night. It was quiet. Awkward in places, but not tense. More like a group of strangers trying to build a bridge using only memories and glances. The food barely mattered: chicken casserole, store-bought pie, lukewarm coffee, but it was something to do with their hands. Something to focus on besides the gaping holes in their shared history. Henry hardly touched his plate. He kept looking at Paul, not in disbelief, but in recognition. Like he was studying a mirror that showed not his reflection, but what his life might have been. Paul, for his part, was gentle. Careful. Not because he was walking on eggshells, but because he understood, instinctively, deeply, just how much this cost everyone in the room. He asked questions. Not the big ones, not the "why didn't you come find me" ones. Just small, patient ones. About Henry's garden. His books. How long he'd lived in the house. And Henry answered. Slowly, sometimes losing his thread, but with a kind of quiet honesty that was new, even to Michael. After dinner, Paul stood by the fireplace. The photograph, the one Scout used to whine at, had been taken down earlier that week. In its place was a simpler frame, newly filled. A black and white image of Elise, alone, holding a small boy in her arms. Smiling. Brave. Paul looked at it for a long time, hands in his pockets, shoulders drawn tight. "That was her favorite sweater," he said softly. "She used to wear it when we sat on the porch at night. After she'd cry." No one said anything. The air felt fragile. Then Henry spoke. "I should have come." Paul turned, the weight of those 4 words visibly settling on him. "I should have come," Henry repeated, voice cracking slightly. "I knew where she was. I knew about you. But I didn't know how to walk back through that door." Paul nodded slowly, not out of forgiveness, but understanding. "I think I stopped waiting for you a long time ago," he said. "But I never stopped wondering." Scout, who had been lying silently by the kitchen door, got up and moved between them. Sat down right between Henry and Paul. He looked at Henry, then Paul, then rested his chin gently on Paul's shoe. No whining. No tension. Just peace. The sound that broke next wasn't a sob, exactly. It was smaller than that. A breath catching in a throat. A heart opening, just a crack. Paul stayed the night. In the morning, Clara made breakfast and Henry, miraculously, ate a full plate. They even laughed, once. Michael wasn't sure why, but the sound of it felt like a beam of light breaking through a room that had long since learned to live in shadow. Over the next few days, Paul didn't disappear. He didn't retreat. He stayed. Not like a guest, but like a relative trying to reclaim something he wasn't sure he had a right to. He helped Henry prune the bushes out front. He walked Scout in the evenings with Michael, asking quiet questions about their childhoods. He sat with Clara one night and listened to her play the piano, eyes closed, like he was remembering something he never experienced. One night, Michael found Henry in the study, sitting in that old leather chair he always hated, staring at the fireplace. In his lap was one of Elise's letters. "She wrote to me until the end," he said, not looking up. "Even after I stopped replying. She never gave up on me. Isn't that something?" Michael sat on the floor across from him. "She loved you. That much is clear." Henry gave a dry, shaky laugh. "I didn't deserve it." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful. "Do you think," Henry asked, voice barely above a whisper, "it's too late to be a father?" Michael didn't answer right away. "Then, I think it's not about time anymore. It's about effort." Henry nodded. "Effort I can do." The following week, they planned a small gathering. Just family. No ceremony, no announcements. Just a quiet evening in the backyard with tea lights strung across the old oak. Clara made her peach cobbler. Paul brought wine. Even Scout got a fresh new bandana. As the sun set, Paul stood up and held his glass. "To beginnings," he said, and looked straight at Henry. Henry stood, too. "To the pieces we pick up. And the ones we're given back." They toasted. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever would be. There were gaps too big to fill, time too long to rewind. But there was something better than closure growing there. There was continuance. Scout laid his head on Henry's knee, tail thumping softly. The photo never went back up on the mantel. Instead, they made a new collage, photos of all of them. Past and present. A new family tree growing on the wall, crooked and imperfect, but finally whole. And for the first time in a very long time, the house felt warm. It was easy to believe, for a few weeks, that things were falling into place. That maybe, just maybe, this family had turned some invisible corner. The nights were quiet, filled with soft conversation and the low hum of the record player Henry hadn't touched in years. Scout stopped whining. He followed Paul around the house like a second shadow, curling up beside him during afternoon naps and trotting beside him on long morning walks. Even Henry, despite the slow creep of age and fatigue, seemed more alert, like someone shaking off a long sleep. But Michael noticed something was still off. It was subtle. A look Henry would get when no one else was watching. A flicker in Paul's eyes whenever Elise's name came up. Like both of them were keeping a small part of the truth sealed off, afraid that saying too much would undo everything they'd finally repaired. One evening, after Clara had gone home and Paul was in the guest room with Scout snoring softly at his feet, Michael went back to the study. The letters were still there in that same weathered box, tied in twine. He wasn't even sure what he was looking for, only that something about them felt unfinished. He started reading them again, slower this time. Reading not just what was written, but what wasn't. Elise had always been poetic. Her letters read like chapters from a novel. But there was a shift in the later ones. A restraint. A hesitance. Mentions of visitors, of someone else helping her with the boy, of being watched. Michael's skin prickled. He flipped further back. Found a letter from '89 that chilled him. "They told me not to write anymore. Said it was time to move on. But I can't. You have to know that he's asking questions, Henry. He's getting older, and he looks in the mirror and sees someone he doesn't understand. Please, I'm begging you, don't let them erase us." Them. Michael sat back, heart thudding. He'd assumed the silence between Elise and Henry was voluntary. Emotional. But what if it wasn't? What if something, or someone, kept them apart? The next morning, he brought the letter to Clara. She read it once, then again, jaw tightening. "You think Grandpa was threatened?" "I think someone didn't want this family to exist." It sounded dramatic even as he said it. But Clara didn't laugh. She just stared out the window, eyes fixed on something distant. "There's one person who might know," she said finally. "Aunt Marianne." Michael blinked. "She died in 2014. No, Clara said. Her daughter. Rachel. She used to help Elise when she was sick. I remember seeing her at the funeral. She looked wrecked. I didn't understand it then. They found Rachel living just a few towns over. A nurse, divorced, one son in college. She answered the door with red-rimmed eyes and a hollow look, the kind that comes from years of carrying someone else's grief. "Why are you asking about Elise now?" she said after pouring them coffee in a cluttered kitchen. "Because we found the letters," Michael said. "And because Paul came back." Rachel froze, cup halfway to her mouth. "You found him," she whispered. "He found us," Clara corrected. Rachel put the cup down. Her hands trembled slightly. She tried to keep him close. Elise. But it wasn't easy. After everything fell apart with Henry, she got scared. There were people who didn't want her talking. She was warned. Warned by who? Michael asked. Rachel hesitated. Family. Church. Friends. Everyone. People thought it was shameful. She wasn't married. Henry was already spoken for, and back then, things like that mattered. A lot. She was told to disappear. Michael swallowed hard. And the boy? They changed his name. Moved states. Told him his father was dead. Clara closed her eyes. She never stopped writing, Rachel said. But she stopped hoping. After a while, she wrote them just to keep herself sane. They left the house shaken. And that night, as the wind picked up again, Scout did something he hadn't done in weeks. He sat in the hallway and barked. One sharp sound. Then a low growl. Staring straight at the study door. When Michael opened it, the dog went straight to the bookshelf. Pawed once. Twice. Michael knelt down and felt along the back of the shelf. A false panel gave way with a soft pop. Inside was a smaller box. Different from the one with the letters. This one was heavier. Locked. Clara found the key a day later, buried in a drawer of Henry's nightstand under old prescription bottles and faded receipts. They opened it together. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Candid shots. Elise on a porch with a baby. Paul as a toddler. Henry standing across a yard, watching from a distance. Photos no one was supposed to have. And at the bottom, a folder. Legal documents. A custody petition. Rejected. A letter from a lawyer, telling Henry in cold, professional language that continuing to pursue contact would result in consequences. Michael stared at it, jaw clenched. They forced him out of his son's life. Clara was silent for a long time. Then she said, "We have to show him." Paul sat on the back porch that evening, nursing a glass of wine, Scout's head resting on his lap. He read every document. Every note. Every photo. By the time he was done, he was crying. Not loud sobs. Just quiet tears, like water seeping through a crack in the wall. Henry came out after a while, moving slowly with the weight of everything he hadn't said. "I tried," he whispered. "I tried, but I let them scare me. I didn't fight hard enough." Paul looked up at him, eyes rimmed in red. "You were there," he said. "You watched us. From across the street." Henry nodded. "I remember," Paul said. "I thought I imagined you." Henry's voice broke. "You didn't." And in that moment, strange, painful, tender, Scout rested his head between them again, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Thick with memory and loss and something new forming between the cracks. It wouldn't be fixed overnight. But it had begun. And for the first time, the past didn't feel like a locked door. It felt like a hallway, with light at the end. The chill of that night seemed to melt into the early hues of dawn, as if even the sky knew that something irrevocable had been set in motion. In the quiet hours before daybreak, The house, once a repository of long-held secrets and subdued regrets, began to fill with a subdued air of urgency and fragile hope. Henry, having borne the weight of his hidden past in silence for so many years, sat on the back steps in the pale light of morning. His face, weathered and etched by remorse, now seemed slightly less burdened as he stared at the scattered photographs in his calloused hands. They told a story that had been muted for decades, faces smiling in stolen moments, a baby's innocent gaze, and the bittersweet image of a love that had defied the conventions of its time. Each image was a window into a past that Henry had never truly allowed himself to embrace, and in that moment, as the quiet hum of an awakening day filtered into the stillness, he felt both shattered and somehow whole. Inside, Michael and Clara moved like careful archivists of a fragile, newfound truth. They gathered every scrap of evidence, letters, documents, photographs, laying them out on the battered oak table in the study that had once served as the silent chamber of their ancestors' secrets. The table, scarred by decades of shared meals and quiet conversations, now bore the weight of stories too powerful to remain undiscovered. Michael's fingers traced the looping handwriting on yellowed pages, while Clara's eyes darted from one faded photograph to another, as if trying to stitch together the puzzle pieces of a life she had never fully understood. Paul, whose presence had broken through the long-standing isolation of this family rift, sat at the far end of the table. His gaze was steady yet burdened, as if every word in those letters echoed through his soul. In the quiet that fell among them, he began to speak in a voice that trembled with both regret and hope. "I remember," he said softly, sitting in the corner of a crowded room, feeling the weight of what could have been. "I once hoped that fate would bring me to you. I never imagined it would be this way." His eyes, glistening with unshed tears, flickered between Henry and the pile of evidence as though seeking permission to speak truths that had long been locked away. The silence that followed was profound, a pause where the past and present intermingled. Henry's voice emerged, quiet yet determined. "I've spent years hiding behind excuses, thinking that silence would protect everyone. But maybe it's not the silence that hurts, it's the distance it creates, the way it robs us of the chance to mend what has been broken." His confession was raw, each word laden with the sorrow of lost time and the urgency of too many missed chances. The atmosphere in the room shifted as if a key had turned in a long-forgotten lock, and the long-abandoned door between past and present creaked open. Michael leaned forward, his tone earnest and resolute. "We can't change what's already been done. But we can choose to move forward with honesty. The boy, your son, our uncle, has been kept away from us for too long. It's time to face the truth, to accept that our family is more complex than any one picture or letter can capture." His words resonated not just as a plea for reconciliation, but as a promise that their shared history, however painful, could be the foundation on which something new might be built. Clara's eyes shimmered as she added, "We have to forgive ourselves as much as we forgive each other. We are not defined solely by our mistakes or our secrets. What we do now, with every conversation, every tear, we set the stage for our own healing." Her voice, gentle yet uncompromising, bridged the chasm that had separated generations. Outside, the world continued its slow, measured dance of life, unaware of the breakthrough unfolding within that house. The soft murmur of a nearby brook, the rustle of leaves in an early autumn breeze, and the distant hum of morning activity formed a tender backdrop to the raw human drama inside. Scout lay at Henry's feet, his head rested on the rug as if he, too, sensed that a new chapter was being written, a chapter where every secret no longer had to remain in the shadows. The family agreed, almost silently, that it was time to reach out. Michael, Clara, and Paul decided to seek the help of an old friend who had long been known for gently coaxing out deeply buried emotions and lost histories. They arranged a meeting with Dr. Stevens, a compassionate mediator who had helped many reconcile with their pasts. In the presence of this calm presence, the family gathered once more in the warmly lit living room, where the walls bore the faded imprints of countless birthdays, holidays, and quiet, shared moments. Dr. Stevens, with her kind eyes and attentive silence, encouraged each family member to speak. Henry was the first to finally untangle the threads of his past. He spoke of a young man bound by societal expectations, of Elise's luminous presence that brought him hope and fear, and of the painful day when he made the decision that would forever separate him from the child he never truly claimed. His voice, brittle yet resolute, echoed against the worn wallpaper as he recounted the events with stark clarity, detailing the suffocating pressure of norms and the relentless admonitions that had silenced him all those years. There was no grandeur in his narrative, only the simple, agonizing truth of regret and remorse. Paul followed, his words weaving a tapestry of longing and quiet forgiveness. He admitted that he had harbored a deep-seated resentment that was gradually replaced by an aching need for understanding. "I carried a piece of that betrayal in every step I took," he said. "But the more I searched for answers, the more I saw that our lives are less about placing blame and more about accepting the imperfect choices we make." His voice, earnest and tinged with remorse, lent a sense of fragile unity to the gathering. Michael spoke next, his tone both reflective and resolute. "I began this journey looking for a scandal or a hidden betrayal. Instead, I found that our history is layered and full of contradictions, moments of profound love mixed with actions that we wish could be undone. But these contradictions make us human. We have a chance now, an opportunity to build something on the foundation of truth, however broken it may be." His words, infused with youthful determination, struck a chord with everyone present, sparking a quiet flame of reconciliation that had long been smothered by silence. Clara's contribution was soft but unyielding. She spoke of family gatherings in which the laughter was forced because unspoken resentments lurked beneath every smile. "Every time we allowed the past to cast a shadow over our present, we lost a piece of what could have been joyous," she said. "I believe that when we honor both the good and the painful parts of our history, we create room for the kind of healing that doesn't erase us, but makes us stronger." Her eyes shone with unshed tears as she recalled small moments of tenderness that had been buried under years of hidden grief. As the conversation deepened, a sense of catharsis took root. The house, once a monument of secrets, began to transform into a living archive of honesty. Each family member, through their individual confessions, peeled away decades of painful silence, revealing not just the scars of betrayal but the possibility of forgiveness. The once oppressive weight of the past grew lighter with every word spoken, every tear shed. Dr. Stevens gently guided them to consider practical steps forward. They discussed the importance of rewriting their shared story, not by forgetting what had been done, but by actively choosing to honor it with empathy and accountability. They planned small family rituals to commemorate the complexities of their history, for instance, planting a tree in the backyard to symbolize growth from the soil of pain and redemption, or creating a memory book that wove together faded photographs and handwritten recollections from every era of their lives. During a crisp, sunlit afternoon a week later, the family gathered in the backyard. The garden, nurtured over the years with care and resilience, now buzzed with quiet life. The freshly planted tree stood as a testament to the fragile yet persistent hope that comes from reconciliation. Henry, with trembling hands and an expression that seemed to carry both the weight of his past and a burgeoning resolve, carefully placed one of Elise's letters into a small, handmade box. "This is for you, and for the family," he murmured, as if speaking to a presence long missed. Paul placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We stand together now, and that makes all the difference," he replied, his voice steady despite the cascade of memories. Michael, watching them with a mixture of wonder and quiet pride, felt as if he were witnessing not merely a renewal of a fractured family, but the birth of a narrative that transcended shame and regret. Clara gathered the photographs and letters, and as she arranged them in a new album, she realized that each piece was part of a grand mosaic, one that did not need to be perfect to be meaningful. In the ensuing weeks, life in the house began to take on the cadence of cautious optimism. The once tense pauses at the dinner table were now replaced by moments of gentle laughter, shared stories, and even playful teasing that hinted at the bonds slowly knitting themselves anew. Scout, ever the silent guardian, roamed the rooms with an almost palpable calm, his eyes no longer fixed on any single image, but moving freely as if acknowledging that the family's secret was now part of a collective journey towards healing. Henry, often seen sitting quietly on the porch in the golden hours of late afternoon, began writing a small memoir, a simple record of choices made and the consequences that followed. He wrote about Elise, the warmth of fleeting love, and the quiet remorse that had haunted him after their paths diverged. His words, unembellished and deeply personal, were not intended for public consumption but for the family's eyes alone, a legacy of honesty that he hoped would guide future generations away from the destructive cycle of silence. Meanwhile, Michael found himself increasingly drawn to the project of documenting this transformation. With an old camera in hand, he started to capture moments, small, transient images of laughter shared over a meal, of arms thrown around one another in silent support, of the soft light of dusk illuminating the family home. Each photograph was a testament to the fact that even in the wake of deep wounds, new beginnings could take root. Paul, whose pain had once seemed insurmountable, gradually emerged from the shadows of his own past. He attended community events and reconnected with old friends, no longer as a wandering soul burdened by unanswered questions, but as an integral part of a family that had embraced him despite years of separation. In time, he began to share stories of his own childhood, of long summer evenings spent in the embrace of familial love, of moments of quiet joy that had been overshadowed by loss. His narrative, gently woven into the fabric of the family's collective memory, softened old resentments and allowed him to see that forgiveness was not an abandonment of grief, but a courageous act of embracing life in all its messy, undeniable beauty. As autumn ripened into winter, the transformation was complete in ways that even the most skeptical among them would come to acknowledge. At a modest family reunion held in the living room adorned with new photographs and carefully curated mementos of the past, each person took a moment to speak about what they had learned. Henry's voice, though still frail, resounded with quiet dignity as he spoke of regret and the wisdom that comes from acknowledging one's mistakes. Clara's words, gentle and full of resolve, encouraged everyone to hold on to hope even when the night seemed longest. Michael, no longer the seeker of scandal, but rather the chronicler of their collective journey, captured every word with the intensity of someone who had seen the darkest parts of his family's history and emerged with a renewed commitment to honesty. And Paul, with tears glistening in his eyes, shared the simple truth that every life, no matter how tangled or bruised, deserved a second chance at connection. In the final moments of that long, heartfelt gathering, as the family sat together on the worn rug in the softly lit foyer, Scout padded quietly into the center. The dog, who had once been a silent witness to so many unspoken secrets, now lay down contentedly, as if affirming that peace was attainable even after decades of turmoil. In that gentle instant, when every heart beat in quiet unison, the home was no longer a mausoleum of forgotten truths, but a sanctuary where the raw, unvarnished narrative of life was not hidden away but embraced, scars and all. With the passing of the seasons, the family story continued to evolve. Each day was an unfolding page, written with the ink of shared experience and the promise of new beginnings. They learned that reconciliation was not a momentary act but a continuous process, a delicate balance between remembrance and hope. And though the echoes of past mistakes never fully dissipated, they became part of a larger, more resilient tapestry that celebrated the strength found in unity, vulnerability, and above all, unwavering love. In the final analysis, it wasn't the secrets or the betrayals that would define them, it was how they chose to face those truths, to transform unbearable sorrow into an enduring legacy of compassion. In that house, once brimming with silence and suppressed grief, a new chapter had begun. One where every whispered confession, every tear shed in solitude, and every cautious embrace in the wake of painful revelations became the stepping stones toward a future free from the tyranny of unspoken guilt. As the final light of winter gave way to the hopeful blush of spring, the family walked forward side by side. The past, with all its complexities and imperfections, had not been erased. Instead, it had been acknowledged, mourned, and ultimately, woven into the narrative of rebirth. In doing so, they discovered that even the most fractured souls could mend, that even the deepest wounds could yield the tender shoots of renewal. And in that shared journey, marked by honesty, love, and a resilient commitment to facing the truth, they finally learned that true healing begins when one is brave enough to step into the light of understanding.